Let us join join our palms together and recite. Homage to the fundamental teacher Buddha Shakyamuni. Homage to the fundamental teacher Buddha Shakyamuni. Homage to the fundamental teacher Buddha Shakyamuni. Verses of opening of the Dharma. The unsurpassable, profound, and wondrous Dharma is difficult to encounter even in hundreds of millions of kalpas. Now I see it, hear it, receive it, and uphold it. I vow to understand the true meaning of the Tathagata. Namo Pho. Okay, so today we will be giving the last lecture of chapter 2. And in the previous lecture, we covered the 5 vehicles of the path to awakening. And we discussed the human vehicle, celestial vehicle, Śrāvaka vehicle, Pratyekabuddha vehicle, and the Bodhisattva Buddha vehicle. And human celestial vehicles, these two are a pair. And then when we are discussing the vehicles to liberation, to nirvana, then we say the 2 vehicles, Śrāvaka and Pratyekabuddha vehicle. And when we are considering the path to, or the vehicle towards Buddhahood, then we call the Bodhisattva vehicle. Okay, and these 3, Śrāvaka, Pratyekabuddha, and Bodhisattva, they have something in common. The 3 have in common, and we call it the Dharma common to the 3 vehicles, and then the Dharma common to the 5 vehicles, all 5, and then the Dharma unique of the great vehicle, which is the Bodhisattva vehicle. And then I showed you last time the pyramid, right? So this is it. This is a structure that we will be delving into today and discuss more. Dharma common to the 5 vehicles, the basic common to major religions, and then what Buddhism differs and is different is the part common to the 3 vehicles about liberation and of the great vehicle, which is towards Buddhahood, the unsurpassed perfect enlightenment or awakening. So now we go to the subtitle would be Dependence on the Lower to Establish the Higher. Stanza 27. By depending on the lower, one can establish the higher. By depending on the higher, one can include the lower. According to dispositions, there are 5 or 3 distinct vehicles. Returning in the end, there is only the single great vehicle, or only the one great vehicle. Explanation. Even though the Buddha Dharma differentiates methods into lower, middle, and higher in relation to the ultimate meaning, which is nothing more than the viewpoint of attaining Buddhahood, these methods are neither independent nor unrelated, but possess an intrinsic relationship of interdependence and inclusiveness, as illustrated by the diagram. Okay, so this is a diagram of the pyramid of the 3 categories of teachings. And so many times the translations or the words used may be a bit different, but they are pointing out to the same thing. For example, the Dharma of the one great vehicle or the single great vehicle, you can call it the higher level or the advanced level. The Dharma common to the 3 vehicles would be the middle level or intermediate level. And the Dharma common to the 5 vehicles will be the lower or the basic level. Okay, so the 3 categories. In this 3-story pagoda, from the ground floor to the top floor, there is a relationship of interdependence and inclusiveness, right? So by looking at this pyramid structure, you would think that, well, yeah, it's obvious. You go from bottom and then you climb up, right? But when we're talking about spiritual practices, philosophical point of views, often people forget that there is a certain sequence to the practice and even the understanding of theory, right? So that's why Master Yinshun tries to emphasize that. And in the Lotus Sutra, the Saddharma Punarika Sutra, it mentions there's an analogy of a person in architecture. So there's a certain person in ancient times, he passes by on the street and he sees this great house, this 3-story house. And he really thought it was majestic. So when he went home, he brought his own builder, architect, to see this building. And he points out to this building and then the structure, and he says to his own builder, okay, I want you to build me this. But I like number 3 best. It's the most beautiful. So pay attention. Build this just starting from the 3rd floor. And I don't even need 1st and 2nd floor. Right? So obviously we know that it's not doable. Right? You need to build from ground up. And then so this is the Lotus Sutras, the Buddhist teachings, is his way of saying that we need to be mindful of the interdependence and inclusiveness of the path. Okay, this structure, this of practice. And then let's go into what is interdependence. So regarding interdependence, so depending on the 1st floor as the foundation, one can establish the intermediate floor. And depending on the lower and intermediate floors as the foundation, one can establish the upper floor. If one insists on building the upper floor without constructing the lower and intermediate floors, that would certainly be an illusion that cannot never be realized. Similarly, in the 3 categories of the Buddha Dharma, one depends on the Dharma of the lower level to establish the Dharma of the middle level, and depends on the Dharma of the middle level to establish the Dharma of the higher level. This is as the Bodhisattva Nagarjuna said. And Nagarjuna is a very important Buddhist master, important figure in Buddhist philosophy. And in this, he appeared in India, ancient India, about 1,000 years ago. And he said, through the attainment of the improvement of lives, one gradually obtains a superior resolution. Okay, so the superior resolution is the Dharma for the final liberation of the middle and upper levels. This sequence was originally described in the Agama Sutras as the conventional method of all Buddhas, meaning all the Buddhas of the past, present, and future deem this method, this structure of the 3 levels as conventional. Furthermore, the Bodhisattva Aryadeva. Now, Aryadeva was the disciple of Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna was the founder of the school Madhyamaka, and then Aryadeva was a student, and after Nagarjuna's passing, Aryadeva continued with the teaching of the investigation on the middle way, Madhyamaka philosophy. And Aryadeva also said, first, one must stop deleterious actions, then destroy the self, and finally eliminate all views. If one knows how to do this, one will obtain the skillful means. So Master Yinshun explains this verse. Stopping demeritorious actions is the Dharma method of the basic level for avoiding evil and practicing good. So you generate the mind of benevolence to do the good and avoid evil. And then next step will be destroying the self is the Dharma of the intermediate level of the liberation of non-self. So this is it's regarding liberation, the mind of liberation. And then finally, eliminating all views is the advanced Dharma that ends all conceptual elaborations, right? Basically, all notions of the self, mind, and everything related, like all phenomena, understanding the lack of intrinsic nature, lack of self nature of all phenomena. By knowing the order of this sequence, one can obtain the skillful means in all of the Buddha Dharma. Therefore, the Bodhisattva Aryadeva also said, the perfect and correctly enlightened one taught thus, meaning the Buddha, he taught thus. The skillful means are like the steps of a ladder. So you start with the mind of benevolence and then step on the ladder to the mind of liberation in order to get to the ladder of the Bodhisattva, the 3 levels. So in terms of vehicles, will be the Dharma common to the 5 vehicles, then Dharma common to the 3 vehicles, and the Dharma unique to the great vehicle. Okay, so this is talking about the interdependence of the 3 levels, right? Now, moving on, and then we go to the inclusiveness. Okay, so regarding inclusiveness, just as in establishing a 3-story pagoda, having the intermediate floor includes having the lower floor. Having the upper floor certainly includes having the intermediate and lower floors. Thus, in the Buddha Dharma, depending on the Dharma of the higher level, one can include the Dharma of the middle and lower levels. And depending on the Dharma of the middle level, one certainly includes the Dharma of the lower level. As stated in the Lotus Sutra, the path of the 2 vehicles, and this is referring to the Śrāvaka and Pratyekabuddha, is 300 yojanas away. Yojana is a measure of distance used in India. Okay, and the great vehicle is 500 yojanas. Certainly, the 500 yojanas include the 300 yojanas. The stop at 300 yojanas is within the 500 yojanas. This view of inclusiveness is a skillful means necessary to synthesize and include all of the Buddha Dharma, like to embrace all of the Buddha Dharma. Like these 3 levels, you cannot be in one level and discriminate against the other levels, or look down, or think it's unreachable. Like all those things are attitudes or mindsets that reflect not understanding the inclusiveness of this structure and also the interdependence of the structure. So the Venerable Master Taishu, who was the teacher of Master Yinshun, he named the Dharma of the lower level, he called it a Dharma common to the 5 vehicles, and named the Dharma of the middle level Dharma common to the 3 vehicles. Okay, and this was in the modern China. We're talking about 1930s, before the change of politics and government in China in 1949, right? And then Master Taixu, he was the teacher of Master Yinshun, and he was the first one who proposed these terminologies. But few hundred years ago in Tibet, the great Master Tsongkhapa, in his work called Lamrim Chenmo, the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment, he named the Dharma of the lower level, he called it the path common to beginners. And the Dharma of the middle level, he called it the path common to intermediates. And the word common reflects the correct view that these two wise masters, okay, so what they have in common in the word of common, like these two wise masters, Master Taixu and Master Tsongkhapa, of different periods in time and different regions, one Chinese and one Tibetan, they agreed upon this three levels classification without having communicated. And this is exactly the mark of interdependence and inclusiveness. So Master Yinshun is trying to make a case how different teachers from different times, they can actually have so much in common, even though they never have communicated, by just examining all the teachings of the Buddha. And just to give you a background story to this, in the so-called early Republic days of China, which means that 1911, that's when mainland China, basically they abolished the imperial system of the Qing dynasty and then established the Republic of China. And the Republic of China dates from 1911. We call it the so-called contemporary modern time of China. And Master Taixu, he was born in that period. And then he delved into the Tripitakas, and he felt that there was a need for the monastics to learn different languages. They needed to travel outside to learn the languages of Pali, Sanskrit, and even Tibetan, and to translate some texts that have not been translated yet into Chinese, right? So one of the masters that a student of Master Taixu that was sent to Tibet was Venerable Fa Zun. And then he went to Tibet and he learned Dharamsala at that time. And he studied for 7 years, and then he came back to China and did translations. And he translated the text of Tsongkhapa regarding the stages to enlightenment. And then he translated from Tibetan into Chinese. And then guess what? It was Master Yinshun, his friend, Dharma friend, who helped him revise the text. And it was after helping Venerable Fa Zun translate this text, Lamrim Chenmo, that Master Yinshun thought, he has a different idea of how to classify the three levels, but then it just varies lightly in the content, right? Which I will mention a little bit later. So that would be a backstory of all these masters and their relationship. According to the principles cited previously, to adapt to beings, the Buddha Dharma has a skillful means according to dispositions. And when we use the word disposition, we're talking about people's good roots, their spiritual tendencies, their propensities, their capabilities spiritually. So different dispositions, meaning different in their level of spirituality. And then, so in order to fit different dispositions, of course, and then we know about the 5 distinct vehicles, right? The human vehicle, that's for one type of disposition, the celestial vehicle, the Śrāvaka vehicle, Pratyekabuddha vehicle, and the Bodhisattva vehicle. these 5 vehicles that which you should have memorized as a structure, understanding. Or when emphasizing the transcendent Dharma, the Buddha said that there are 3 distinct vehicles, right? The transcendent Dharma, meaning the Dharma that leads to nirvana, to liberation. And that's what's different of Buddhism from all other major religions. And then these 3 distinct vehicles are referring to the Śrāvaka vehicle, the Pratyekabuddha vehicle, and the Bodhisattva vehicle. Now, for different dispositions, the methods certainly have differences. However, from the original and transcendent intention of the Tathagata, all methods are nothing more than paths that lead to Buddhahood. And this is not just any path. This is talking about all the methods that the Buddha has indicated through the path of Śrāvaka, Pratyekabuddha, and Bodhisattva lead to Buddhahood. And returning to the principle and seeking the final goal, there is only the one vehicle, Ekayāna in Sanskrit. And we also known as the great vehicle, Mahāyāna. This does not mean that all beings must become Buddhas, because some beings, due to their dispositions and their likings and their own choice, motivations, they may choose to just enter into nirvana, the way of the Śrāvakas and Pratyekabuddhas. But ultimately, there is only the Dharma of the one vehicle to be obtained, meaning this is the path, and then ultimately it's Buddhahood, right? But then some people may choose to stop at the human level, the celestial level, or the liberation in the nirvana, but not reaching ultimate Buddhahood. But ultimately, this is one path. This means that from the point of view of returning to the final goal of the Buddha Dharma, all its levels, advanced, intermediate, and basic, are the one vehicle to attain Buddhahood, the Dharma of the great vehicle, right? So here, of course, let's be very clear that Master Yinshun, he himself is a proponent and a promoter of the Mahāyāna way, the way of the great vehicle. And then he believes in his heart that the Buddhahood is the ultimate way that we should seek after, the objective of our practice as Buddhists. Okay, and so here we go. For example, those who cultivate the practice of renunciation of the Śrāvaka vehicle, which is of the middle level, attain the fruit of nirvana. However, the Buddha in the Lotus Assembly, in the Lotus Sutra, is explained, considered that vehicle as skillful means. So the Buddha in the Lotus Assembly, in that when he gave the lecture of the Lotus Sutra, he considered that the Śrāvaka vehicle, the middle level, is actually a skillful mean, and that in fact it is part of the very great vehicle. Right? Therefore, he said, all your practices are the Bodhisattva path. And in the Master Yinshun cite another text, the Mahaprajna Paramita Upadesha, or Shastra, depending on the translation, 大智度论 in Chinese. It is also said that the wisdom of renunciation of the 2 vehicles is the Bodhisattva's conviction of the Dharma of non-arising. So it is also like what it is said in the Lotus Sutra. By reciting once Namo Buddhaya, or Namo for in Chinese, all have already attained Buddhahood. So offering incense or a flower, bowing hands together, or bowing in homage, reciting once the name of the Buddha, these good human celestial teachings of the basic level, from the perspective that everything returns to the great vehicle, all are the Dharma of the one vehicle of Buddhahood. Right? So basically, he's just reiterating, citing different texts, different discourses of the Buddha, supporting his argument that the path is one, and that is the path to Buddhahood. So there are some people who think that the one vehicle and the great vehicle are different. Okay, Ekayāna and great vehicle will be Mahāyāna. Some people say that they're different, but in fact, they are the same. As in the Lotus Sutra and the Srimaladevi Singhanada Sutra, both teach the Dharma of the one vehicle, and sometimes also call it the great vehicle. So it's actually mentioned like interchangeably. But how are they used differently, right? So Master Yinshun explains. And this has to do with definition. Okay, so you need to remember this because this will come up again in chapter 4 and chapter 5. So the term great vehicle is usually used in contrast to the term two vehicles, like great vehicle, two vehicles, or great vehicle versus the vehicle of liberation, right? And the term one vehicle is usually used to explain that everything leads to Buddhahood, right? It's talking about the oneness of the path, right? Path with a capital P. In a similar situation, if the emphasis is on the causal stage, and that's also a terminology, causal stage, meaning the stage at which the practitioner is planting the causes, and then it is called the bodhisattva vehicle. And if the emphasis is on the virtue of the effect, right? So it's talking about the result, right? Then it is called the Buddha vehicle. But it's the same. Bodhisattva vehicle is the vehicle that leads you towards Buddhahood and then attained Buddhahood. And you can also call it the Buddha vehicle, naming the destination, the final destination. And Bodhisattva is the path, the process. These are just distinct designations according to the meaning of the teachings. For throughout the entire course of study and practice of the path to Buddhahood, all dharmas, and in this case is capital D because it's talking about all the teachings of the Buddha, are interconnected and inclusive from beginning to end, and do not have differences of superiority and inferiority. Basically, all the teachings of the Buddha that leads towards Buddhahood should be considered and understood as interconnected and inclusive, interdependent. One should not say that is lower, that is so meager, and then look down, or look at certain teaching. Oh, that's a teaching for the great ones. Has nothing to do with me. No, that's not how we view the different teachings according to different disposition. We know our own, or at least we should be aware of our own disposition and say that, okay, I'm at this level and I should practice like faithful, truthful to this level, even if it's lower level, because that's where I'm at. But being mindful that there is the middle level and the upper level. Okay, so and that's what next is talks about the not being stagnant in the middle and basic levels, right? So let's look at stanza 28. Do not be stagnant in the middle and basic levels. Also, do not abandon the middle and basic levels. One should completely encompass them, heading towards the Buddha vehicle, and not slander the correct Dharma. Okay, so the sequence from beginning to end of the Buddha Dharma has already been briefly explained earlier, right? Right before this. Therefore, in the study of and practice of the path to Buddhahood, one should not remain stagnant in the middle and basic levels. So if one is practicing and if one is doing well, one should not just remain stagnant. If one stays stagnant in the Dharma of the middle or basic levels, then one will establish oneself in the path of human celestial vehicle and the Śrāvaka vehicle. So we'll get to a certain level and we will not progress anymore. And will not be able to connect with the original intention of the Tathagata. So, and by original intention is basically, if the Buddha himself, he reached Buddhahood, and he said, he proclaimed that he reached Buddhahood. Obviously, when he teaches us, he would like us to achieve the same as himself, because he's a great teacher. A great teacher always wants the students to have everything, to accomplish everything that they themselves have accomplished. And then the Buddha, like as a gift, just expounded everything he knew about the path to us, right? So we should take that into account of his effort in making the teachings available to us of the 3 levels, right? And but we cannot just say, oh, I'm just going to pick on the 1 and 2 and not the number 3, right? So there's an analogy here. And this is for those of you who know about Taiwan, about going to Hsinchu, and he says, this is analogous to going to the Fuyan monastery in Hsinchu, right? And it's starting from the center of Hsinchu and stopping midway. So you're trying to go to the Fuyan monastery, and you start from the center of Hsinchu, the city, and you stop midway. Despite the beautiful scenery, if one does not ascend to the Guanyin Plateau, which is in between, and does not reach the Fuyan monastery, how can one see the beauty of the mountain and the shine of the lake, the waves of the sea, and the shadow of the pagoda? So basically, if you stop midway, you will never reach the final destination and not see the beauty, the full force of the Buddha Dharma, which is Buddhahood, basically. So when generating the Bodhi mind with Buddhahood as the goal, one should also not abandon the methods of the middle and basic levels, because all these are part of the Bodhisattva path practice, and all are methods for attaining Buddhahood. There are some people who seek something lofty and marvelous and think that the practice of the great vehicle does not need the methods of the middle and basic levels. Basically, these are the people who just look at the bling bling, the prize at the top, and then they just decide to skip the lower and the middle. They do not know that they by abandoning the stop at 300 yojanas, which is using the same example as mentioned before, they cannot reach the treasure place of 500 yojanas, which is the end, the final destination of Buddhahood. For this reason, practitioners who wish to tread the correct path of Bodhi must completely encompass all the middle and basic methods and practice them all, heading towards the Buddha vehicle. One should not dream high and far, nor discuss mysteries and talk about miracles, for generating branches in the single unlimited Dharma would be like slandering the correct Dharma. So it's basically talking about having the right view. Without the right view, one is actually, in a way, slandering the correct Dharma. And there are 2 ways or 2 categories of people who slander the correct Dharma. Okay. One type. Those who consider certain sutras or methods are not the Buddha Dharma. So they read this sutra and go, no, this is not what the Buddha says. I don't care for, and this is not. and that is. Oh, this is it. Oh, that is not. They start making pick and choose, right? All the sutras, not understanding that just different sutras is meant for different dispositions or different levels of practice, right? Now, this type of person who slanders the Dharma can be easily recognized and avoided by most people. Well, so you can tell these are people who kind of like they know some Dharma and they just think that I know everything now. So this is it. Everything else is not, right? And they are very easily identifiable. You can see them. That's there. And then you don't need to criticize them, but you need to know that they are slandering the Dharma. And I'm pretty sure all of you who have been in the Buddhist circle, different communities, you've heard enough about that. Now, the second type is there are people who think I am of sharp disposition, like I am awesome. I'm of high capacity. I don't need the kindergarten, elementary, high school stuff. Yeah, I need like postdoc, PhD level, right? I am sharp disposition. I do not need the middle and basic methods. Okay, that's one type. And then there are others who think Master Yinshun is naming things that actually people that he often finds or encounters. And then there are others who think, oh, the teachings about cause and effect, good and evil, do good, good cause, reap good effect, bad cause will reap bad effects. Those are for the inferior or foolish people, duller people, people with dull disposition. And then that have nothing to do with me. And there are others who think within the great vehicle Dharma, only one particular sutra or even a part of a sutra, a particular Buddha's name, a particular mantra, that's sufficient. One sutra, one Buddha, one part, one phrase, one thing covers everything and like surpasses everything. That's slandering the Dharma. Having this particular sutra name, a Buddha's name, mantra is equivalent to possessing all the Buddha Dharma without the need for any other methods, etc. Right? So that's obviously something is wrong. Someone says that just because that method works for them, or that line, that phrase, that sutra they identify with, obviously in accordance to their disposition, they think that I don't care for anything else, and nobody should care for anything else. Just practice what I practice. And there are others who think truly it is only necessary to practice the methods. It is not necessary to listen to or reflect on the sutras and teachings. Like, you don't need to study the Dharma. Why are you listening to all these lectures? Oh my goodness, don't you have better thing to do? Just keep reciting your Buddha name. Just keep meditating until enlightenment. And just be awakened. Why are you listening to all these teachings? Why know the structure of the Dharma? There are people who think like that. That's slandering the Dharma, the correct Dharma. About these people, it can be said that they tread different paths and return to the same destination. Basically, they may think that they are sharp disposition, they have found the right method for them, but Master Yinshun is saying that, but they're just on a different level, different location of that path, and they'll return to the same destination. Now, these kind of people, or all of them listed above in number 2, right? They abandon the unlimited sutras and methods And then they take a drop of water and abandon the ocean and still convince themselves that the ocean is contained in this single drop. So the argument is, if this drop of water, the essence in this drop, is the same as the ocean, I only need this drop. I don't need the ocean. Individually, the foolishness and stubbornness of these people are apparently small faults. Okay, if they just so believe like by themselves, and then they hold on to this practice, and then this not wanting to study or not wanting to practice meditation or not wanting to put in the work or not trying not to complicate things for themselves, and they're just trying to simplify to the simplest possible way that they feel comfortable. If they decide that for themselves, it's no big deal. It's small faults. However, what if in relation to the propagation of the Buddha Dharma, the spreading of the Buddha Dharma, a monk, a nun, a community, an organization proposing these ways that somehow slander the correct Dharma, then that's a big problem. They become a huge obstacle. It's almost like poisoning people's minds, right? So this category of slander against the correct Dharma is due to the lack of understanding of what? Of the overall structure and purpose of the Buddha Dharma that we just provided, that Master Yinshun provided for us, starting from chapter 1, chapter 2, how to hear the Dharma and enter the path, and then the path. What 3 categories of or levels of teachings, and then the level of benevolence or improving one's life or future lives, and the level of liberation and the level of the bodhisattvas. So the commentaries say, and many commentaries say that faith, and especially blind faith without wisdom, increases ignorance. And ignorance is the biggest evil in the spiritual search, in this path towards the universal truth, this path to Buddhahood. Ignorance is terrible. See how terrible ignorance is? Aha! So that finishes the chapter 2. We're done with chapter 2. And like always, I would like to give you okay, so we finished the explanation of the text, chapter 2 of the Path to Buddhahood. And let's go to the summary. The summary of chapter 2, hearing the Dharma to enter the path. So there were 2 parts. We started with hearing the Dharma, part 1. And then we discussed the benefits of hearing the Dharma, hearing with incorrect attitudes, and correct way of hearing the Dharma, and the motive for hearing the Dharma, the right motive, right? And then we went into the second part, which is to enter the path. So we discussed associating with good and knowledgeable people, Kalyana Mitras, good advisors. We talked about the requirements for hearing, and we talked about entering the treasure mountain and acquiring treasures, and then hearing the Dharma and generating 3 levels of motivations. One is the mind of benevolence. You're trying to improve your life now and future lives, right? Because you understand suffering and you want to come out of suffering, but you just want to improve. That's all. You're not trying to end suffering. You're just trying to get better, right? And then so that's called getting better, improvement, the betterment of present and future lives. And that is the mind of benevolence. And if you observe this life through your practice, you realize that suffering, it's built in, programmed into existence. So in order to end suffering, you need to generate the mind of liberation, renunciation. To renounce what? To renounce greed, hatred, and ignorance. And then the third kind, generating the mind of awakening, which is um, the practice of the Bodhisattva, based on benevolence and liberation as foundation in order to awaken, and not only oneself, to help alleviate sentient beings and awaken sentient beings at the same time one awakens. So that would be a brief summary of chapter 2. Okay, so this is the graph that will really help you understand the wisdom of the middle path. Okay, and this is where when in chapter 2, in chapter 1, it was mentioned that Ananda, he thought that just by relying on the Buddha, and the Buddha will bless him and will just bestow upon him the practice of samadhi. No, but it wasn't true. It was not automatic. He needed to practice. He needed to practice it himself, right? And also in chapter 1, it was discussed that the practice of the Buddha Dharma requires commitment, right? And so Ananda said, by finding the right teacher, it's half the task is already accomplished. And the Buddha said, no, 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 no. It's 100%. It's complete. Finding the right Kalyana Mitra, it means everything, right? And so is it half? Is it full? Is it whatever? Well, basically, depending on the audience, the Buddha would teach according to their disposition. That's why in the wisdom of the middle path, there are two categories that actually check and balance themselves. Okay, so there's on the one side there's the so-called the 4 prerequisites, which we discussed this time in chapter 2, and the 4 reliances that were not discussed yet will be covered in chapter 4 or 5. Okay, and so let's go to it. These they actually check and balance themselves. Okay, so in the 4 prerequisites, number 1, it says associate with good spiritual advisors, Kalyana Mitras, right? And we covered extensively. We even explained the 5 virtues that a Kalyana Mitra, the perfect Kalyana Mitra, should possess, right? And how we should learn, even with 1 virtue, is worthy of our respect. Or even, not even the 5 virtues, but one thing that I cannot do well in the practice and this teacher can, then that already merits respect for the teacher, for the Kalyana Mitra. But like last time, someone said, but I cannot handle that. I cannot just confide and trust blindly on someone. Oh, and of course, in other occasions, the Buddha talked about the 4 reliances. In the first reliance, the Buddha said, rely on the Dharma, on the teachings, not on the person. So associate with good advisor, it's one side, and rely on the Dharma, not on the person, on that persona, that perfect picture that you have in your head. Don't rely on that. You have to rely on the teaching. The teaching can be good, but not necessarily that person can live up to the teaching. But if you associate with good spiritual advisor, yet you rely on the Dharma, not on the person, then you find the middle path of your relationship with the Kalyana Mitra. with an organization. And even this first one, I mean, I could go give a full lecture of how people in their spiritual search, first they look for different religions and then they come to Buddhism thinking that in Buddhism, in that organization, everything will be different. And then they put a very high expectation on how everything will be wonderful from now on. And then woof, they have a fight with one of the teachers, or they have a fight with one of their fellow practitioners. They don't like the so-called the building, some workings, the inner aspects of that organization, of that teacher, whatever. And then, oh, this is not the way either. It's all wrong. And then they blame it on what? On the triple gem of Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. What does this have to do with Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha? It has to do with your lack of wisdom. It's your ignorance. If you're not practicing the middle path when you are approaching the teacher or the organization, then you are not practicing in the right way. So associate with good spiritual advisors while you're mindful of reliance on the Dharma, not on the person. You're not trying to idolize the Kalyana Mitra. No, you are respecting and you are sincere to receiving the teaching and the instructions whenever it is in accordance with the Dharma and the precepts. If it's not in accordance with the Dharma, as you know, or if it's not in accordance with precepts and it requires you, someone or some organization require you to break the precept, then you should not follow such instructions. Okay, so second, third, and fourth, I'm just going to read them because this is not the lecture to discuss in detail, but it says, listen always to the right Dharma, okay? And then at the same time, rely on the meaning of the teaching, not on mere words. Mere words means take words out of context. Perceive something out of context. Take one paragraph and says, this contradicts everything. So everything is wrong or this is right. No. There is always context. There is this interconnectedness of the teaching, interdependence, this sequential aspect of the teachings. So you need to understand the meaning, the true meaning, not just mere words. Words are conventions invented by humans. We need to go to the meaning, right? So how do you do that? By listening always to the right Dharma, to the Kalyana Mitra, by associating with good spiritual advisors, yet at the same time rely on the Dharma, not on the person. Hey, okay, so that's a little circle right there. And then move on. Third would be to reflect on the Dharma in accordance to its principles, right? Reflect in order to practice them, right? So, but at the same time, you need to rely on the definitive, the complete teaching, not on the provisional teaching, right? Because there are some teachings that the Buddha gives to the lower level and the middle level, but it's pointing towards what? The upper level, the third level, the Bodhisattva path. So rely on the definitive teaching, not on the provisional, right? And then follow the Dharma and practice accordingly, right? So you associate with good Kalyana Mitras. You listen to them, or you read and study the text that they indicate you to study. And then you reflect on the Dharma and you practice, you follow the Dharma and practice accordingly. And all this time, you are relying on wisdom, not on the discriminatory consciousness. And by that, it's referring to discriminatory consciousness is talking about eye, ear, nose, all the senses, plus our so-called discriminatory mind thinking that aligns with ignorance, and we are just always looking for comfort and not trying to put in the work necessary to purify our mind and our behavior, right? So we rely on the wisdom, which is pure, not on the discriminatory consciousness filled with afflictions, right? So four prerequisites, right? And then that with checks and balance with the four reliances, then you get what we call the wisdom of the middle path. Okay, so this is just giving you a heads up because someone asked something, and I think this is a good way for you to understand how to find out, strike that right balance. And the balance is the middle path, right? Associated with good spiritual advisors while relying on the Dharma, not on the person. Okay, so we have finished chapter 2, and then we will be, I need to give you like a lollipop to give you incentive to participate on the and continue with chapter 3, which will be Dharma common to the 5 vehicles, which will cover many things, and in which I'm going to list what we'll be covering. The principle, or theory, will be in chapter 3, and that will begin in November when I am in Vancouver. The correct conviction in the Triple Gem, right? And talk about what is right livelihood and what is right views, the mundane right view and transmundane right view. But this chapter 3, focuses on mundane right view. Chapter 4 focuses on transmundane or transcendent right views. And then right views, mundane or worldly, has 4 aspects. Knowing what is good and evil, knowing what is karma and consequence, or the word is vipaka, knowing past and future lives, and knowing ordinary and noble, meaning what is being ordinary and being noble, like liberated, right? Those are the 4 right views, mundane. And then chapter 3 will cover in detail the transmigration, how we move from one destiny to another, right? And then we already mentioned the human realm is the best a place to be, but the why and the theory behind it, right? So it talks about transmigration in the 5 destinies. First, it discusses how one ends up in bad destinies, how one fall into the hungry ghost realm or animal realm or even hell realm, right? And or the other aspect, good destinies. How reborn in the human realm or the celestial realms? And there are 28 of them. And so that will be like the principle, the theories, right? And then the practice, right? So the method. So suffering comes from bad actions. Why? How does that work? How does suffering, it's coming from our bad actions of the past and present? How does that work? It's talking about the cause and effect aspect. And how happiness comes from good actions, right? And then what are the good actions? In the so-called Dharma common to the 5 vehicles, which is common, the basis or the fundamental aspect of Buddhist practice in order to build the practice of liberation and bodhisattva, then they are called the 3 meritorious actions, right? And the 6 remembrances, right? And another practice that's Master Yinshun introduced in this chapter 3, it's the method of Maitreya. How can you get to where a bodhisattva Maitreya is and practice with Maitreya, right? And finally, it's about the fruit. So there's a theory, practice, and fruit, or principle, practice, and fruit. And then fruit is talking about the result, okay? The desire to be human and to be born human, right? And cultivating merits without desiring to be divine, right? How is that done? How can you cultivate the merits through generosity and upholding precept, yet not desiring to be born in the heavens? And why? And what is the theory behind it? And desire to be born in the time of the Buddha. And last but not least, Master Yinshun talked about the Pure Land in Tushita, which is the so-called the temporary Pure Land of the Bodhisattva Maitreya. And then so one can be reborn in the heaven of Tusita, which is one of the heavens in the desire sphere. Okay, so I'm pretty sure I convinced you to join me again in November for chapter 3. Right. And let us now do a transfer of merit, and so we can move into question and answers. Okay. I wish to eradicate the 3 obstructions and all defilements. I wish to attain wisdom and true understanding. I wish that all calamities and obstacles be universally extinguished. I shall constantly practice the Bodhisattva path, life after life. Namo Pho. So thank you so much. See you soon.
Thank you,
Be well. Bye.
November.
Continue your
Bye.
practice.
Bye.
Generosity, discipline, and
Bye-bye.
meditation. Okay? Yes, yes.
Thank you,
Ciao.
Sư.
Ciao, ciao, ciao.